Hi, I'm Emma and welcome to Otterwood Cottage. So I'm really lucky that I work from home most of the time, and so on this glorious day I'm using my lunch hour just to do a little walk of the perimeter of the property. So to situate you, I'm starting just in the corner of what will be our growing space, and just walking the perimeter to check how much work we're going to need to do over the next weekend to clear away. If I turn around, you can see our electric fencing here behind me, and we're hoping very soon to get some rescue hens. We've been in touch with a very local rescue hen centre, and we're going to be picking up some rescue hens soon. But before we do that, we need to electrify some fencing around the area that we're planning to keep the hens in. And to do that, we're going to connect that, we think, to the entire perimeter of this property is protected by 3-line electric fencing, because it was a equestrian property, and so our previous owners had the 3 lines of electric fencing running around the entire outside of the perimeter, which is amazing to have that infrastructure already in place, but obviously isn't protection against foxes and isn't protection for the chickens getting out. So we will need netted fencing for them, but we think we can link that fencing to this fencing, which is connected back to the mains electricity and saves us needing batteries and so on. So what we haven't done yet, and what I'm looking at now to see how much work it might take, is to walk the perimeter fence and see if there are any places where the vegetation, the hedgerows are touching. As I understand it, I'm definitely not an expert in electric fencing. We are learning as we go. I'm going to pause here because we've got a jet going overhead. So as I understand it with electric fencing, and as I say, definitely no expert, and perhaps somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but what you don't really want is anything touching the electric fencing that is grounded, that is also touching the ground, because that will cause the electric fencing to continually discharge, which we obviously don't want it to do. So we're going to come along this weekend. Unfortunately, I don't think the weather's going to be as beautiful as it is today. I think we're going to have some drizzle, but we're going to come along this weekend and just cut away any areas where the hedgerow is touching the electric fencing. That's going to be really useful. I mean, the hedges all need doing anyway. That's a job that we will definitely need to do relatively soon. We have some fantastic friends who own a small holding in Somerset who have a super powerful hedge trimmer that they have offered to lend to us. So they're going to be bringing that in November, and we'll spend a few days. I think it will probably take, in reality, to do all of the hedges, and that's going to be a learning curve for us in terms of how long that takes and how big of a job it is every year, and whether we can reasonably do it in a weekend or a few days, or whether actually we need to set aside more time for it. But that's a future thing to think about. So I've just reached the opposite corner of the field from where I started, and this is the fence I've checked so far. And as you can see, the 3 strands of electric fencing all go around the edge. And not too much of the hedgerow so far appears to be problematic. There's a few bits we're going to have to take away, I think. And where I've got to is the corner of cow fields, which is the second field to check. So this second field, there looks to be a little bit more, but still not too much so far, that we're going to need to cut back. We've actually need to get our hot bin started, and in the bottom of the hot bin we need lots of twigs and woody bits to give it airflow at the bottom. So we're hoping that the chopping back we will be doing will help us to start off our hot bin. Most of our composting will be in a 3-bay composting system, which we're hoping to build as one of our first projects, although we're getting into the stage now where every project feels like it's a first project. I was watching Liz Zorab the other day, and she mentioned that when she starts one job in the garden, it immediately leads to another job, and the first job never gets done. And we're definitely in that space just in our planning at the moment with the small holding. We think we're definitely going to get chickens And then before we can get chickens, we have to get electric fencing. And before we can get electric fencing, we need to check that the existing electric fencing is clear. And I'm sure there will be another job I'll come up with. So we keep working backwards. We're in this kind of strange Tetris puzzle of where do we start? What's the first job? And every job we talk about at the moment seems to be the priority job. So we're going to have to get better at really thinking about what truly is the priority. And we did have a bit of a chat this morning as a family about not overwhelming ourselves. We are sheltered, we are clothed, we are fed, we are warm, and they're the priorities, of course. Anything that comes after that is gravy. And so as much as we want to get all of these projects up and running, and we're really excited about it and our heads are full of plans, it's also good to just slow down, and particularly on a day like this, enjoy where we are and just be grateful for being here, which we are every day. I mean, who couldn't be grateful for being here on a day like today with a view like that and a big sky as blue as that? And as the lunchtime walk goes, this is a pretty enjoyable one. There's our farmer neighbour's field. There is a duck pond further up, and the ducks in the evening sound as though they've all got rip-roaring drunk and find each other absolutely hilarious. It's the best noise as we're heading to bed, hearing them laugh at each other's jokes. One of the other first jobs of the many first jobs that we've decided we must do is, of course, to get our growing area going. We've come from just having an allotment, but it was an established allotment. And actually the saddest thing we said goodbye to when we moved, we weren't really concerned about the house, even though we'd done lots of work on our house too, but saying goodbye to the allotment, it felt like we'd put lots of our soul into all of the growing we'd done there, and it was tough to say goodbye. And now we're coming to a fresh start. There's nothing here at all, no beds, nothing to grow in. Really starting from zero, which is so exciting in lots of ways, but it does mean that big long list of things to think about. And yesterday I had the best hour spending some time at Greenaway Compost, who is a yard half an hour away from here, and getting to see how they make their compost. Joy and James spent so much time with me. They were fantastic, explaining their composting process, how they get their organic certification, their different grades of compost and wood chip that they're going to be able to apply to supply to us, and we're having that delivered in bulk, which is really exciting to get us started. And I was really grateful for their time. Also fascinating to see the composting making process at scale, and she was giving me so much useful advice and support on creating our own compost here. But again, that whole process, exciting as it is, created a new set of lists where, in order to do one thing, we had to go back a step and think about another. So the volume we're having delivered actually is quite overwhelming when we think about it, because we're having 18 tonnes of compost and 18 tonnes of wood chip delivered to get us started, which feels like an awful lot. And when I saw what an 18-tonne pile of compost looks like, my back started hurting before even starting any work. So that led to a conversation around what kind of ATV, all-terrain vehicle, we might want on the property. We had in mind that we would probably get a second-hand quad bike. We've got some bits of kit that were left, really luckily, by the previous owner. There's a scarifier and a roller and a couple of other bits that he pulled behind a quad bike, and that's what we had in mind to start with. But in conversation with Joy and James and thinking about moving large quantities of compost and hay and other things that we will probably need to move around the property over time, we did wonder their advice, and I think we should heed it and think very carefully about it is to think about, instead of a quad bike, getting a second-hand mini tractor that's got some sort of front-loaded bucket or potentially a mini digger on, which would save us an awful lot of back-breaking work. We're not inclined to do things mechanically that we can do ourselves. In the past, we've always done things with human power. Shovels and a wheelbarrow have served us well, but then we've been growing on a much smaller scale, of course. And so we're going back and forth, Mr. H and I, between, are we being big sissies, big southern softies, thinking about getting equipment to help us move the 18 tonnes of compost and then 18 tonnes of wood chip mechanically, or should we just do that by hand, as we probably would have done in the past? Never quite moved that much all in one go, of course. So lots to think about. I'm going to turn you around now. I've ended up in the smallest paddock, which eventually is going to be for pigs, although even that's a shorter term plan. The long term plan for the pigs is that we want them to be able to free range in the wooded area that we're planting, but of course that's a 10-year, maybe even 15-20-year plan for that wood to be established enough that we can release pigs into it and them not destroy the saplings that we're planting. So the short-term plan is just to have pigs for a few months at a time, and they're going to come into this smallest paddock, which we're going to turn into a piggy paradise for them. But initially, before we do that, we are going to have our first lot of hens in here so that they can help us to prepare the ground this winter to clear away some of the grass that's here. And the plan then is for us to plant some tasty treats which we'll be able to grow for over the following year or so, a few months, before we then get some piglets who can come in. And alongside the commercial feed that we'll buy for them to make sure they have everything they need, they'll be able to root up all the things we've planted for them as a treat, and to make sure that they are living their very best lives in this paddock. So I'll turn you around now and you can see the area we have set aside for them. So this is the planned paddock for our chickens initially, our hens, rescue hens, and this is the area that we will be running electric fence all the way around. As you can see, it's well hedged in, and there is 3-strand electric fencing around at the moment, but that's not going to stop Mr. Fox, nor is it going to stop our lady hens from being able to escape. Now, we'd be very, very happy if they chose to escape in this direction and free range in the cow field and our other fields, but unfortunately, if they go through the hedge, and there's plenty of places they could go through the hedge, that goes onto the main road, is not our property, obviously, and could cause them and a driver some pretty bad damage. So we definitely don't want them escaping that way, and we don't want Mr. Fox coming in to get them this way either. So a fair amount of electric fencing is going to be needed. It's 125 metres in perimeter, so a fair amount we're going to need to get in the first instance, and that seems to be the theme at the moment. There's very much a theme at the moment that along with all these first jobs are big payouts, so we knew coming that we would have quite a lot of infrastructure items to buy, and so as part of what we did with the mortgage, we borrowed enough to have a little bit extra to buy the things I've been talking about in this rambling walk around the property, things like electric fencing and quad bikes, or as it turns out, possibly mini tractors. So there's a small amount of money set aside for us to do some initial purchases, after which we will be saving and buying as we can. We do both work full time. This is a hobby and a lifestyle, something we do in the evenings and at weekends. I'm really fortunate in that I have a job working with the education sector. I was a teacher and I'm now work for an education charity, and so my term times are exceptionally busy, full-time plus, but the payoff for that is that the holiday times, the typical school holidays, I have a lot more flexibility. So in terms of running a place like this, there is a huge benefit to us, which we appreciate not everybody will have, who might be dreaming of this life, in that I have a lot more flexibility at kind of puncture points throughout the year in the school holiday times, often really helpful points around Easter when you're doing a lot of planting and your garden's getting into full flow and you're starting to think about animals, buying them in or certainly growing them on. And then in the summertime, for the very busy period in the garden, I have a lot more flexibility, which we're hugely grateful for. But we do have 9 to 5 full-time jobs and a lot of travel, so we're away a lot overnight. So we do have help at the house in the form of my mum and stepdad, who split their time between their property and here, which again, we're really fortunate to have. We understand not everybody has that, but that gives us the flexibility to be away when we need to be away for work, but also to know that the land and the property, and most importantly the animals, are looked after while we're not here. So once the initial outlay is done and that money runs out, then it will be a case of, as we can save up and pay for the next thing on the list. Not everybody's comfortable talking about money, but I also know that when we were considering starting this lifestyle, it was a big concern for us. How do you afford it? Can you do it while working full time? And our biggest inspiration on YouTube has been Tracy and Steve from Our Smallholding Adventure. And if you're watching this and you're not following them and you're not already watching their videos, then stop watching this immediately. Go and follow their channel. They have far more knowledge, far more experience, and are brilliantly pragmatic, sensible people who also have full-time jobs and manage a small holding. And they really were inspirational in us thinking through whether we could do this. Tracy's always really helpful whenever I've reached out and asked questions. So do check them out if you're not already watching them. So it is possible, I think, but you need to be aware that this is not a lifestyle that makes you a lot of money, and it's not a lifestyle that necessarily means that you can quit the rat race. Certainly we can't. We've still got a mortgage to pay. We've still got commitments, financial commitments that we need to meet. And in my case, I actually love my job and I'm privileged to be able to do it. So the combination for me of a job I love and the chance to live this life means that while I can't spend full time out in the grounds and I won't be able to constantly be in the garden as much as my heart might want to be, it does mean that we can think about things like mini tractors and large amounts of compost. I'm just heading back over to the growing area because talking about the compost has reminded me to share with you some of our plans for that space. In the last video, we gave you an overview of all of the plans, and you'll know from that one that our growing area is intended to be over here, immediately behind the house and the outbuildings closest to the property. We are vaguely aware of and have read around permaculture principles. We're not avid followers of any particular approach to things. We do what works for us. But one of the things that does make sense with permaculture principles is to keep the things you need to go to most frequently closest to the house. So the growing area is going to be immediately behind the house. Mr. H is just approaching a gate over there and has frozen, realising that I'm filming. You can come in, it's fine. There he is. So this area is going to be our growing space, and closest to the house, just immediately here behind me, will be eventually, and probably not that quickly, a greenhouse. Sooner than that though, hopefully being ordered fairly soon, although we're still doing our research as to which one to get. On this side of the gate will be a polytunnel, which I've never had before and I'm very excited about getting. And then a couple of covered areas, another kind of polytunnel frame with a net over it for fruit cage type, for brassicas, and then a fruit cage behind that for our fruits and berries to protect them from the birds and other predators. We are going to have in the wooded area a number of fruit trees and berry bushes which we will share with the local population, but we know from our allotment that you can lose an entire bush of berries overnight if you're not careful, and so we are going to protect some so that we have a harvest for ourselves. And then the rest of the space back here will be in-ground beds. We're going to go no dig. We've always used no dig at the allotment. It's worked really well for us. I know some people don't always enjoy that approach, but it works really well for us, and certainly our backs enjoy not having to dig up grass in particular, which is perennially difficult to remove. No dig isn't no weeds. I think that's a bit of a myth. You still have to weed. I quite enjoy spending time weeding, getting my hands in the dirt, seeing what's going on, so I don't mind. But you do have to stay on top of weeding even with no dig. I think there are probably less weeds over time, but it isn't a foolproof no weed approach for sure.